Hello, hello, hello. Yes, yes, yes. We are here. I'm so excited to see all of you. Ann, Isabel, Anthony. I see some of you coming in already. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't yet, go tell your friends, go tweet, go text, go tell them to jump on because this is going to be about having a very open, frank, authentic, raw conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Look, I know it couldn't be a more relevant, timely, hot topic. But look, I've been talking about this most of my career because that's what I've been doing in human resources, in leadership development, and employee relations, and certainly as a global head of diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. I have been talking about this for a long, long time, but I am so thrilled to see so many more people willing to also lean in and have this conversation. So that's what we're going to do today. Thank you for coming into my LinkedIn live show. I am thrilled to be talking about not only this important hot topic, but I'm going to be talking about other topics as well too, as it relates to the workplace, as it relates to our experience as people of color, as women, as different generations, people with different abilities, different personalities, thinking styles, communication styles. So basically, I'm going to be talking about us, right? We're all a part of the conversation. So that's what today is all about. Thank you for joining us. And yes, one of the things I want to do today, different from my very first LinkedIn live show a couple of weeks ago, which was launching the first ever diversity, equity, and inclusion for dummies book. I'm so excited about the book and having the opportunity to have been the author of it. And certainly, as you know, the Dummies brand, it's all about learning more things that you don't know about yourself and things that you want to know more about the world around you, the world of work, and all of that. So I just wanted to be able to leave this legacy of something so important of the work that I've been doing and why it is key and critical. So before I get started, I always I'm big on relationships and I'm big on how important it is to have key people in your life that not only share some of your values and your views, but even those who bring very different perspectives and different experiences. And I am so thrilled today that I've got a colleague, a friend, and what I would consider a badass. She calls herself a reformed and retired lawyer, but she's going to join me today because I love, love, love her perspective. And she and I just banter back and forth about this stuff all the time. We serve clients together. We work together. She's a part of the SDS Global team. I just could not have her be a part of what we do because she's got such great perspective. So I have a special guest today, and I'll let her introduce herself to you even more. But we call her the mistress of badassery. And I'll let her tell you that why in just a second. But Kelly Charles Collins Esquire, come on in, Kelly. Kelly Charles Collins Esquire is a badass sister, and I'm so thrilled to have you on, Kelly. Kelly and I've known each other for a number of years, and over the last 3 years or so, we've been working together in partnership because we are, forced to be reckoned with. Yep. I think we are rock stars together. And look, it's important to have badass women in your network and badass experts and professionals and other colleagues as a part of your board of advisors. And Kelly is that for me. So Kelly, please introduce yourself to everybody. And again, just tell them about why I'm using the word badass.
Well, first of all, Dr. Shirley, thank you so much for inviting me on to your LinkedIn live show. I'm so proud of you. I am over the moon proud of you. And for everyone, hello, I'm Kelly Charles Collins. I am a retired attorney. I practiced law for 24 years. Yep. The last 20 years, I was an employment lawyer. So I represented companies on discrimination, harassment, retaliation, you name it, I did it. But I retired at the end of 2019 and went on the journey of becoming a professional speaker and trainer. And that's how I ended up partnering with Dr. Shirley and SDS Global, around unconscious bias, bystander, all things that relate to me as an attorney. But the reason that she's talking about and keeps saying badass, which just thrilled my heart to death, I was just laughing before I came on, is that I'm also what I call the chief visionary badass of Ladies Who Leverage, which is a global network and mentoring accelerator for female entrepreneurs, specifically those who are at six figures or just about there, and really helping those women to connect authentically, build strategically, and live life unapologetically AF, as I say. And yeah, we are all about badassery. And so that's why she keeps
Yeah,
saying that.
and look,
Um,
badassery is all about just living your life to the fullest
that's right.
and bringing your best self every day, not only to work, but showing up in life every day with your superpower and knowing your inner power, and every day living your life the way that it
That's
was
right.
designed to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about DEI and unconscious bias, that's one of the things, right? So when you're talking about showing up as your true self, as
Yeah,
your authentic self, and it's interesting because I've always felt this way about myself, but coming out of the confines of the practice of law, being able to fully embrace all of that, right? In a totally different way too. I always was a badass in court, right, when I showed up, but just being able to expand that. And I want to say, as you were saying about us working together, I think that's so important, that for people to really lean into what we're saying,
yeah,
because you and I train almost exactly alike, which is so funny, right? On the same topics, we have our own businesses, and yet we still have figured out the way to strategically work together. I train your clients all the time. I just trained trained
yeah,
them yesterday. And we partner so that when I have my clients and there are things that are not within my wheelhouse, or just things that I don't have as part of my services, I'm like, hey, you need Dr. Shirley. And I think so many of us need to really understand that there is enough for everyone, and
yeah.
that women who are high achievers, who are badasses and rock stars in their own right, and have their own businesses, can still, as we say in Ladies Who Leverage, collabosource to make sure that everything is covered. And also that, but it takes a level of trust and integrity, right, to be
That's right.
able to do that, because and I know
Yeah,
there's nothing that can happen with our clients. Like, nobody's going to come in the back door, nobody's stealing anything, but we show up
yeah.
for each other's clients as if it was our own. And so I
That
think that's so important for people to understand too, just the dynamic of our relationship.
Yes. And then, relationships are so key and critical, even to our success. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our true self and our authentic self, you have to recognize that we can't do this work alone. You can't be in your organizations as a lone island and not have people in your corner, people who will push you, people who will give you advice, people who will share ideas and successes. One of the things that I write about is, I've talked about this at being a woman and a person of color and being the only one and being marginalized in my career, is that you have to surround yourself with the right kind of people who will help you think differently, see the world differently. And that means having a real diverse network of people. And Kelly is one of those. Although we train alike and we communicate alike, we still have very different experiences. Kelly actually is not American. Kelly is actually from Jamaica, right? I'm an
Yep.
African American, but Kelly is Black. So that then really our uniqueness, is our diversity, allows us to have different experiences and different perspectives. And we've been able to find shared meaning and leverage that. But we've also been able to appreciate each other's unique identities and experiences. Kelly is an attorney. I'm not. I did employment law, but Kelly actually practiced it for 24 years. So we've been able to come together and our paths cross at the right time. So I say to you, even in your organizations, recognize that you've got
Yeah.
people who may look like you in gender, may look like you in age, may look like you in height, weight, and size. But the more important piece of diversity, equity, and inclusion is going deeper, is not being shallow, but it's experiencing the person's their backgrounds and their uniqueness, and leveraging that for greater ideas, greater innovation, for how you better serve your clients and your customers, for how you better show up, for even how you expand your thinking and your worldview. So
Yeah.
that's what this work is about. This is what today's conversation is about, is to just kind of talk about, how do we show up every day in our true authentic selves, but how do we do this work when we have people who are at different stages and phases and different experiences, even in diversity. Some people just don't want to talk about it. Some people are afraid to talk about it. Some people don't have the skills to talk about it. And other people feel like it's just a political issue. So we're, all over the spectrum. So today is an opportunity for Kelly and I, now with our badasseries, to come together and to have this conversation, because we've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and now we're running our own global consulting firms and our businesses to help others do the same thing. So thank you so much for those of you who are here. I see Christopher. Hi, good to have you there. I see, is it Thecia? Thank you, Thecia. I see Mary Beth. Thanks so much for you guys being here. I just want to acknowledge all of you for coming in today. I also see Gabrielle, I see Tara, I see Anthony. Thanks again, Spencer. Good to see you. Look, let's get started. I want to hear from you. What are some of the key challenges in this work around DEI that is keeping you up at night? What are some of the questions that you have? You've got two people who, and I've held the role of Chief Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and Kelly's been in the courtroom, right, helping to fight for the rights of those who may not have those, have enjoyed those. And so this is your time to actually ask us the questions. We've got a few that's already been submitted, but want to ask you to throw in what's your challenge with, what's keeping you up at night, what are you just sick and tired of, and what are some of the things that you need in order to help close the gap, move the needle in your organization, get some of the work done, and truly make an impact.
Dr. Shirley, while we wait for the question, I want to follow up on something that you said in terms of our differences in experience.
Yeah.
Because what we have learned, especially in the wake of George Floyd's murder and a lot of the work that we were doing around listening sessions, the importance of having that diversity of experience. Because as a lawyer, I was able to hear things a little bit differently, and I was able to pick up on things, right? And we were able to kind of diffuse some things, or, let people know, like, don't need to talk to us, but you may need to talk to a lawyer, right? And so, as you said, like, we look alike, we're, Black women, we're in the same space, but in our backgrounds, we do have varied experiences. And so that's really, when we're talking about DEI, why it's so important to have diversity of experience and thought, because where you come from in your background, the filter that you hear information through is so vitally important to the conversation and to making sure that all the bases are covered.
Absolutely. Good. And we have to do that, and making sure too that, as much as we know, we also have to listen and learn and recognize that we're on our journey as well too. And there's, language and terminology and experiences that I'm still hearing and saying, oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. So let's recognize that all of us are still on the journey. Nobody has the corner on the market of DE&I, but there are some of us who have more experience, and I've got more successes, and I've also had some missteps and mistakes. And oh my God, I can't believe, and I had those epiphanies and aha moments. So the questions are flooding in. So I'm going to ask if we can maybe get a few of those to pop up on the screen, and let's get to answering some of them. So one of them I see too, I'll get this one while we load some of the other one. Is one question, Kelly, is, and we know this one, right? We have a lot of issues with this one, is convincing men that this work or this program is necessary, right? Convincing men that this work in this program is necessary. And I'll start, and I know, Kelly, you got a few examples as well. But for me, I want to recognize, first of all, when I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm using this as a broad sense. I'm defining it in its global sense, meaning that this is about all of us. White men, it's about men in general. It's about people of different ages. It's about people with power, with privilege. It's about people who don't have it at all. So when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's first recognize and include men in the conversation, because you can be a straight white male and still be diverse, right? You got different personality styles, different religious beliefs, different faiths, you got different experiences, different educational levels, different abilities. So you are a part of the conversation, and convincing them is helping them to understand that they can also be allies, that they can also be champions, that they can also help to lead this in their organization to create the right kind of culture. I'll stop there, but Kelly, I know you got a few more, and then I'll probably hitchhike on that thought too.
No, I mean, similar to you, and a lot of it, and when we're talking about the training around these topics, I come at it really from the unconscious bias perspective, right? Yeah. Because I believe that unconscious bias is really the problem, and then we have the symptom is this lack of diversity and inclusion. And so when we're talking about unconscious bias and you're talking about men, it's exactly what you just said. Everyone is included. I always say it's unconscious bias is about what makes us each uniquely wonderful and different.
That's
And
right.
so, are you left-handed? Are you right-handed? Do you have pink hair? Do you have a disability? What's your sexual orientation? All of those things go across the spectrum of who we are as human beings.
That's right.
And so I'm always talking to people about, how do you get people to have these conversations? So we're talking about men. How do you get men to have these conversations? And part of it is that when we're talking about unconscious bias, there's a misconception that it's all about race and gender, right? And
Yep.
so, or it may be that, well, if you talk about unconscious bias or agree that you have it, I'm an ist or an oak, racist, sexist, xenophobe, homophobe, right? And so the important thing for me when I have these conversations is to have people come and feel at ease, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to change you as a person. I always tell people, I'm just trying to open your heart so you can change your mind. You can
That's
change your mind, right?
exactly.
And so, really making people feel comfortable that what we're talking about is human, right? And
Yeah.
it's about humanity. And so if white men, black men, men in general are humans. So
That's
you're a part of the conversation.
Yeah. The other thing too is that we've got to also continue to frame the conversation in a sense of this is about business. It's about sustaining, the organization's success. It's about the bottom line. It's about how do you innovate? How do you solve complex business problems? How do you attract top talent? How do you engage and get the best ideas, the best performance, the best productivity? How do you ensure that you can continue to meet the needs of a changing customer, client, member, donor base? And how do you continue to globalize and innovate? So when you have these conversations and try to convince men, you can also speak in their language. And most of the men that I've had to convince were the ones that were at the top in the C-suite, E-suite, and at the board level. So you got to learn to talk their language as well. So I want to get to a couple of other questions, but that I think answers that question. What's the next one? Let's pop it up. So the next one is, where do I start when the person bringing their authentic self to work tells me that he or she doesn't believe that systemic racism exists, that they're tired of the race hustling, and this was their words, and DEI is just crap. Well, Kelly, let me let you start with that one.
So, Dr. Shirley and I have this thing, right? We
Oh,
have
I
this thing
know.
about people like that. And this is what I say.
Yeah,
Around these conversations, I
yeah,
always think about I'm planting seeds. So I'm going to plant the seed and it is immediately going to take root with some people.
that's right.
I'm going to plant the seed and it's going to take some time, right? It's going to take some time to nurture and fertilize it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to plant a seed and somebody's going to tell me take that seed out my garden.
Mm-hmm.
That's this type of person who wants
Yeah.
to say, take that seed out my garden. And Dr. Shirley and I like to say, we're not talking to you.
That's right.
Right? You can't convince everybody.
That's
And
right.
so people like that, I mean, it's hard if that person is in leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now that's a whole different issue that you need to address because we're talking now about the culture of the organization.
Yep.
But if you're talking to an individual person, we have to understand that not everyone wants to have these conversations. Not everyone believes in this.
That's right.
And you can't talk to everybody.
Yeah, that's
So
right. Talk to the ones who are open to hearing. The other thing that Kelly, and this is kind of like the 80-20 rule, talk to the 80% who want to hear it, who are interested in hearing it, who want to try to understand it. The other 20%, you may not get them, and it may not be you to save them. But what I do is talk to those who listen, who want to learn, and then I leave it to some of those other leaders. They may be able to touch and talk to those who don't get it right now. They may be the ones that can influence their peers and their colleagues, but you don't want to exert so much of your energy trying to convince the unconvincible, and you don't want to try to save those who don't want to be saved. I want to help those who are interested, those who lack knowledge and understanding, which is what the Dummies book is all about, right? The Dummies book is all about helping people to understand something that they don't understand right now, and they want more information. They want to go deeper. They want practical tips and practical, easy to understand information. That's what this is all about. So it's for them. At some point, somebody will help them understand it, that this is important, or they'll have to leave a company. And, because companies are now saying, if you don't live our values, if you don't practice inclusion, if you don't want to treat people with dignity and with respect, this may not be the company for you. And so, Kelly, one of the other things I always say too, in addition to, hey, we're not talking to you, the other thing I always say too is when you can't change the people, change the people, right? So you may have to also make some of those tough, difficult, courageous decisions to even to leaders and those who are the biggest blockers and resistors to say, you know what, if you're not willing to live the values that we embrace around DE&I, this may not be the place for you. And you have to release people to their destiny. And that's
right.
okay too.
That's
Next
right.
question. Thank you for the question, Sherry. All right. So Mary Beth is asking how to engage conversations on experience and stories without making that person feel like the token person and being the lone representation for their group. Good. So how to engage in these conversations about your experience and your stories without making that person feel like the token person. Look, I have been, when I say token, I know that there have been times where I have been the token. I've been the one that was called in because they needed a photo op. I have been the one that was selected because they got sued and now they got to bring in more women and people of color, as particularly African Americans, and I got picked. Look, I was still good at what I did, but I also recognized that they selected me simply because of my color. But at the time of that, too, I make it work to my advantage. It's like, look, I'm qualified, I'm educated, I've been working hard, I've been getting the results. You just finally found it out. You just finally caught up with me. I've been a hidden figure in your organization for years. But look, here's the other thing. Use your tokenism sometimes as an advantage. I use it as an opportunity to speak up, to step up, to stand up for those who haven't. And for those times that I didn't have the courage to do it. So I got a little bit more boldness over the years. I grew up, I got more mature, and I stopped saying, okay, I'm going to allow this person's opinion to matter. No, I don't allow certain things to matter anymore. And so I'm saying share your story, share your experiences unapologetically, but also be emotionally intelligent and sensitive and culturally competent enough to know when that person wants to hear it or when they don't want to hear it. And when you share your story, share what you learned from it, but also allow people to learn from you, ask questions and that kind of thing.
Yeah. One of the things that I always talk about when we're talking about having these types of difficult conversations, I always tell people, and I talk about this in my book, Conversations Change Things, where I talk about the perfect framework for having these conversations. Two things.
Yeah.
If you only know these two things about the conversation, one, what is your intention? Why are you having this conversation with this person? And two, what is the objective? What do you hope to get out of it? If those are the only two things that you know, then it will direct the tone and tenor of the conversation. And so that the person that you're having the conversation with will understand whether or not you're coming in to make yourself feel comfortable. Because a lot of people want to have these conversations with people of color or Black people so that they can have their own comfort.
That's right.
And so you're putting upon the person to make you feel comfortable. However, if you go in with good intentions and you're really trying to understand and learn, then that person will get that intention from you too. And going back to the whole thing about token, whether you're a token, in my last book, Unapologetic AF, I talk about the whole thing about being token, expert, or spokesperson. And when you're the only person in the room, I've always decided that I'm just the expert. Right? You can think I'm a token, you could think I'm the spokesperson, but for me, I'm the expert because I'm the only one who looks like me, who has these experiences. I'm the only one who can speak to them. So I'm the expert in that situation. So even in this question where, you are the person who's being asked the questions, just think about the framing. How can you frame it? And, make sure that you are keeping control also of the conversation and the intention and the outcome.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about that too, Kelly, is I know too that especially after George Floyd, and there's so many companies and organizations that started to focus back on having the conversations. So many of my own colleagues in my community said, I'm just tired. I'm tired of having the conversation. I'm tired of being the only one that has to talk about it. And I'm saying, you know what? I'm tired too. But at the same time, we still got so much more work to do. We've got a generation and 2 and 3 more generations to impact and to leave a great legacy. And so even though we're tired, you know what? We got to hold each other's arms up. We got to lick each other's wounds. We got to push each other back out there and be each other's support because we are the change that we're looking for. So we've got to be willing to, yes, be tired, but keep fighting, keep speaking up, keep stepping up, and keep being allies and champions. And if that means sometimes feeling like, yeah, I'm fatigued and I'm tired, and I'm the token, this is the time now when people are asking questions and people are listening in and they're leaning into the conversations. Be okay with being the only one, but be okay with, as Kelly said, framing it differently, that I'm the expert in the room and I'm going to go ahead and share it.
We had, and in all of when we were doing all those listening sessions, I mean, we did so many listening sessions,
Over 100.
right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, and it was overwhelming, right? To just be having these conversations all the time, especially ones that we had never had before.
Yeah.
But it was something that when it first happened, I said, I don't want to have these conversations. My son is a victim of police brutality, and I don't necessarily want to have these conversations, but I felt a responsibility
Yeah.
to have the conversations, and also to be there for those of us who just didn't have the capacity,
That's
right?
right.
Or just don't even want to, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, they're asking questions. People are asking questions. We need to provide answers, and so
Yeah.
those of us who can do.
Yeah. We're called to this. This is a
Yeah.
calling. This is a life assignment. For me, it's my why, it's my purpose. And so for those of us who are, being a token is actually an advantage. And so let's use it as that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Mary Beth. The next question is from Teresa. Thanks for being here. All right. How do you keep the momentum going and not letting DEI become a check the box activity? Kelly, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So, I always talk about making sure that DEI is woven into the fabric of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Shirley does a lot of work with companies on strategic planning.
Yep.
Companies have strategic plans, and those are the things that they focus on. Those are the things they pay attention to. Those are the things they throw money at. Those are the things that they hold you accountable for. If DEI becomes a pet project that's
Yes.
over here,
Yeah.
or when something happens, we're like, oh my God, roll out the DEI carpet, right? We got to do something about it. Then you can't keep that momentum. So in order for it to keep the momentum, you have to insist, and you have to make sure that leadership is held accountable for weaving it into the fabric of the organization, that it becomes part of the culture and not some pet project over here. That it's not just, oh, let's pull out the DEI thing today, right? No, when we're talking about our numbers, when we're talking about whether the company is profitable, when we're talking about whether or not we are the standard, the gold standard in our industry, when we're looking at our competitive advantage, all of those things, DEI needs to be woven into every single piece of those things. And that's how, for me, that's how you can keep the momentum.
Yeah, and the other thing I think too is keeping the momentum is also about not being the only person who is implementing and driving this. You have got to ensure that this is seen as a leadership competency and a leadership responsibility and a strategic priority, so that every leader, and even down to the staff, every worker sees that they have a role to play in living the values. That's the other thing about Kelly was talking about, integrating it into the organizational DNA. That includes the values. That includes the strategic and the operating plan of any organization. It includes performance expectations. It includes your key performance indicators. So if you can get the DE&I woven into each of those aspects, then it's something that everybody is responsible for. So that's the other way to keep the momentum. The other thing is through DEI councils and DEI committees. It's also through your employee resource groups. You want to make sure that you've got a staff that's enlisted as performers to be your pair of hands, your pair of eyes, and your pair of ears, so that you can hear and understand the pulse. What are people going through? What are people experiencing? And then they can also help you to implement. So don't be the only sole person that is the architect, the visionary, and then the implementer. Nope, you got to enlist leaders and help every worker to see they have a role to play in contributing and fostering a culture of inclusion. Now, in the book for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Dummies, I actually have an entire chapter specifically called Positioning DEI in the Organization as an organizational strategic priority. And one of the things I ended with is keeping the plan alive, right? So there's some steps in there for how do you ensure that, one, you get a strategic plan in place, tie it and align it directly to your organization's strategic and operating plan, so that it becomes an enabler and not a standalone, and it's not done as a silo. But then you utilize some of these tips in here that I talk about on keeping the plan alive, and that is continuing to communicate it out to your staff, and whether it's in meetings, town halls, whether it's team project updates, keep it before the people, involving leadership in the rollout of it and keeping them as a part of your change agents. Remember remembering that when you think you've done, you probably are just halfway there. There's always more work to be done. Making sure that it's on your website, that it's on your intranet site, that it's in your marketing, it's in your branding, it's in your community outreach, it's in your customer strategy, your marketing. Look, I can go on and on. I think you got the point. That's how you keep the momentum going. Look, this is not about you working yourself out of a job and saying, okay, one day I'm no longer going to be a diversity manager or diversity officer. No, as long as you got two people, you're going to have people that have conflicts, and you're going to need to continue to help the organization get along and help people to work more effectively and more collaboratively together. So yes, keep it going. It's a moment. The momentum is important, but it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
Next question. A LinkedIn user says, what are the best DEI trainings for managers?
Well, the ones that Dr. Shirley and I do.
You heard Kelly say earlier, we've been doing a lot of listening sessions, and we've been doing a lot of training. And Kelly and I have actually trained together. And this is why I love her, because we banter back and forth together. We've got, just that energy together. And I think it really is attractive, and it's appealing to so many of our clients. They like to hear that we're conversational, but we're experts and we know what we're talking about, and we're giving them some practical tools. But some of the trainings, best trainings, is always start with some of the foundational pieces. Make sure people understand what is DE&I, just the definitions, the terminology, because it keeps changing and evolving. I'm learning terms now that I didn't know before, right? I just learned what neurodiversity was just a couple of years ago, right? But I've been doing this work for nearly 30 years. Neurodiversity isn't new. It's been around for a long time. So we're learning that, right? We're learning more about the pronouns. We're learning more about other disabilities, and we're learning more about, Islamophobia and even anti-Semitism, and how this impacts the ways that we think, the ways that we show up, the ways that we treat people, and the ways that people feel in the organization. So that basic foundational training, I always encourage clients start there, so everybody gets on the same playing field and they're hearing the same thing. And then Kelly and I are big on, we've kind of built what we call a DEI certificate program, and it's progressive. So foundational, so we call it DEI 101. The next level would be to help them understand what is implicit bias. That's the next level. Then the next level after that is, how do you move from unconscious bias to intentional inclusive leadership, right? That's the next level. And then the next level is, how do you then ensure that you are implementing and fostering a culture of inclusion and belonging, and what is everybody's role and responsibility in building a welcoming, winning, world-class culture. We've even done taboo topics, right? Tips for tackling and talking about taboo topics and having conversations, but you don't start there. You need to have all those other trainings in place and build the foundation and build up the trust and the skill level, then start to talk about those tough and impactful conversations. So that's one, but I offer 18 different types of trainings on DE&I for different levels and different industries. But those are some of the ones that I'd say that Kelly and I have seen the most impact for managers and leaders at all levels.
And I think one of the ones that I focus on that Dr. Shirley doesn't really focus on in terms of bystander intervention, and that's one that we have really had people asking about, especially in the wake of everything that's happened over the past couple of years, and coupling that with courageous conversations. And so Dr. Shirley does a real, broad spectrum, and I focus on three real areas. I focus on unconscious bias, bystander intervention, and courageous conversations, because I think about the accountability. They all have this level of accountability. And like you said, Dr. Shirley, you have to have the foundation so that we can then have these discussions around how do you intervene and how do you have the conversations around this. And so, yes, people are always saying, oh, these types of trainings don't work. They don't work because you don't want them to work, or they don't, right? Or they don't work because maybe they're not being taught properly, but they do work. And it is a journey. We're not going to train you today and all of a sudden tomorrow it's like miraculously you know everything. But this is a journey about raising awareness and being appreciative of the impact of our decisions, right, on not just ourselves, but the people we work with, the people we live with, the people that are in the world around us. And so it's really, we do, especially when we're talking with clients about a full spectrum, taking them through. And when people say, well, I don't necessarily want to do the whole thing, we at least say, well, you got to do unconscious bias.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
that one we can bring in DEI, but then we can really get people. I think the thing about unconscious bias, Dr. Shirley, and tell me if you agree with this, is that it's one of those things that when we're talking about DEI, I think people really think about that in terms of numbers and the business case. And we're talking to people about unconscious bias, and we can give the examples of, human behavior and, looking at things like, the tip of an iceberg and what are your first impressions. I think that sometimes gets people more involved and understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing you did mention too, and I think it's important, Kelly, is, some people will say, well, does a training really work? Not by itself, not in and of itself. Training is a avenue and it's a resource. It's a starting point, but you cannot just only do training, check the box and think you're done. You can't only just hire a woman or a person of color or any other underrepresented talent and think you're done. This really needs to be a culture transformation. It really needs to be a mindset shift, and it has to be ongoing, not only learning and education, but skill building, coaching, and consulting. And that's the work that I think is important for all of us to do. And I've seen it fall short too often, to where clients and companies have been okay with hiring a few people and having a few training programs, and then want to know, how do we measure success? We don't measure success. You need to measure your success.
Yeah.
And that comes to the extent of how much are you willing to make the investment into skill building, and then holding people accountable, and then making sure that it is embedded in their individual development plans, as well as their performance expectations, as well as recognition, rewards, promotions, pay, and all the other stuff. So training is important. And as you can see, we could talk about it all day. All right, another question. Thanks again, LinkedIn Learner. Oh, Letitia Bryan. Hi, Letitia. How to establish metrics that will measure DE&I progress? Well, I'm big on measure what matters, because don't get into trying to measure everything, because I got about 15 or 20 different metrics that you can use, but you do want to measure what matters. So for example, I do know companies do count heads. Now, it's not enough to just count heads. You do want to make the heads count. Counting heads is the diversity, right? That is the recruitment, that's the sourcing, that is the making sure you've got enough people represented in every aspect of your business and leadership roles, and if different industries and sectors. But you also want to make the heads count, which is also looking at your culture, the experience of the employee. How are they feeling a sense of belonging? How are they feeling included and involved? How is their voice being heard? So some of the metrics might be not only in the sourcing and recruiting, but it also may be in who's being promoted, who's getting paid fairly and not paid fairly for the same work that they do. You might want to look at your exit interviews. You may want to look at who's declining offers, who's some of the people that don't want to come work for your company. It may even be who turns over quickly, right? Maybe 6 months to 9 months to 18 months later, you've got a heavy, or I should say a high increase of women that just don't stay. You got a revolving door. Track those kinds of metrics. You can also track your employee engagement surveys and who's most disengaged and why. Don't assume that because 80% of the staff says that they're happy, they're included, they feel wonderful, and all is good with, and gravy. But think about and break it up, slice it and dice it, and look for where you have pockets of people who may be the minority voice, and that means they're being drowned out by the majority voice. Find out what they're experiencing. Find out what for them they need in order to feel more included, more set up for success, more leverage, more heard, more valued, and more understood. That's a few of them.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that, Dr. Shirley, is that focus on the metrics that matter to your organization.
That's right.
So we can, like Dr. Shirley said, we can give you a list of metrics. They may not be relevant to your organization. So you need to figure out what is important for you to measure and focus on that.
Yeah. And what's general? There are some universal ones that I just called out, but there may be some very specific ones too. Yours might be, for example, if you're performing arts, which I've got a number of those clients, theirs is big on donors, right? How can they increase donors? It might be diversity on your board
members
as well too. It might be your level of governance. It might be your community outreach. So there are specific metrics that matter to your organization based on your industry and your sector. So use some of those, but then make sure that you can capture the employee experience. And for them at the level of how do you break it up by women, men, age, tenure, seniority, and looking at race, gender, and culture as well. Thank you, Letitia, for your question. Are ERGs still relevant? they are actually more important than ever before, depending upon how you leverage them, right? So look, we've seen an evolution here too. They've started out as affinity groups, and affinity groups were kind of like support groups. And the old school way of doing it was that people would get together and gripe about everything that was wrong with the company. And then it evolved, and I know this because I used to be a part of one. I started them back in the day, so I can talk about it. But I've seen the evolution move, though, to now being much more focused on business strategy and surely around how do we impact the bottom line? How do we make sure that we're coming up with new ideas around how we can better service our customers, our clients, our consumers, our members, and our donors? How can we ensure that when we bring in new people, top talent, that they have peer coaches, that they have sponsors, that they have mentors? How can we be a part of the recruiting aspect and make sure that the Black Employee Network Group or the Women's Network Group or the LGBT or Pride Group or whatever ERG you have, that they're becoming a part of the recruiting and sourcing aspect, that they're contributing to mentoring and development, that they're helping people build skills and build the kind of knowledge that's needed to be successful, that they can grab you and give you redirective and course corrective feedback. So yes, ERGs are very, very relevant today. And I've seen a number of them have both internal and external impact. So they are out in the community. They're helping to get new clients. They're, coming up with new and innovative ways of providing products and services to clients. So yes, they are still relevant, but you got to use them in a very strategic, business focused way. And yet still use them to educate and use them to build knowledge and awareness around different cultures and different backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah. Two things I want to add to that is one, make sure that the ERGs are funded, right? Because so we have these ERGs and they want to do the work like Dr. Shirley is talking about, but they also need to have funding to be able to do some of that, bringing some of the training, right? And not just give them like a little piece over here and be like, oh, here's a little bit of money, because this training, if you're really committed to it, costs. Right? It's not inexpensive. And so if you're really dedicated to it, then you will budget for that.
Yeah.
The second thing I think around ERGs is around the ERGs themselves, in terms of, yes, they are formed for a particular group, but it's also very important that they have other people, right, who are outside of those groups, who are members of those ERGs, because you need those people as your allies, as your advocates, as your amplifiers. That's and right. Also for people to come into those spaces so that they can be exposed, right, and understand what are the challenges, what are the things that we're talking about, and be, as we always talk about, be more culturally competent. Right. That's so right. You can effectively advocate and amplify the voices in those ERGs.
Yep. And look, there's a book for it, right? Look, I want to keep pushing it. I'm just really thrilled that the DEI for Dummies book, seriously, I hit on everything I could. I know I couldn't hit 100% of all there is to know about DE&I, but I darn sure did a comprehensive job of making sure that all of these kinds of topics were hit on. So chapter 14 literally is launching DEI councils and employee resource groups. So yes, it's in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Dummies book. So make sure you get that, because I'm going to be pulling out a lot of some of these topics over the next couple of weeks. I want to pull out some of these specific topics like metrics, like ERGs, and how do we leverage them? How do you continue to make sure that they're sustained and that we measure their level of success? So thank you for asking that question. But I'm really thrilled that we now have this as a real piece of comprehensive knowledge and as a resource and roadmap. All right, another question. We have about 15 more minutes, so I want to make sure we're getting to all of them. But this is so much fun. All right, what's the next one here? Kelly, read that one.
So it says LinkedIn is running an ad in the new definition of professionalism and how conventional norms have changed. How do we embrace different personal images while preserving the company values?
Well, I would hope that the company values embrace your uniqueness and allow you to show up as your most authentic and transparent self. Even that part that I have my hair flipped to the side like Kelly and it's a nice golden brown, or even if I decide that I want to have a little bit of a body art on me, or even if I want to wear my hair natural, right? Definitions of professionalism is changing because the demographics are changing. We've got 5 generations now, and the largest segment of our workforce now are the millennials and the Gen Zs, and they're going to continue to push the envelope, and they're going to change our definitions of what is professional. And I'm not saying that this means wake up up and come and show up any old kind of way, looking any old kind of way. But I am saying that we're seeing more and more organizations having to revisit their professionalism standards to make sure that they are more inclusive and less exclusive, and that they're not reflective only of a certain privileged group or majority or dominant group, and not being inclusive of a person's true identity. So it always comes back to me, Kelly, around, can I still do my job effectively even if I look different than what you consider normal, if I'm beyond, or if I'm different from the traditional conventional dress code or professional look?
Yeah, I think that's so true, and I'm so glad that you pulled that in the beginning about values, because values should be inclusive. One of your values should be that you're an inclusive organization where people feel that they belong, and part of that belonging and inclusiveness is being able to show up as who you are. And I'll tell you, like, as a lawyer, talking about hair, that was a thing for me, because in my second to last trial that I had, when my hair was longer and I wore it, naturally curly. And I was going to trial in Palm Beach, West Palm Beach. And I knew I'd be there for 2 weeks, and it was in front of a jury. And I had to really think about my hair. And I decided that I would not wear my hair naturally curly, and I would make it straight. Why? Because we know that, two things people are looking at when they first encounter you. Do they trust you, and are you competent?
That's right.
And for me, people may say, well, you weren't being authentic. No, I was being realistic, right? And I understood how to navigate the space. And so I straightened my hair, not because I didn't like my natural hair. It was still natural. It was just straight. Yeah. I straightened it to take away that part of the barrier for them to listen to me. And I think that's when we're thinking about how we show up and what does professional mean to us, right? Because it has generally meant white male, white woman, right? In terms of looking at our even our dress codes. And now we have to think about, I know, like, in probably the last 10 years of my practice, where we had to be changing the handbooks because we had to put in there about gender identity and gender expression in terms of what you were allowed to wear to work. And now we're having to legislate, Black women's hair so that we can, show up as who we are with the hair that grows out of our scalp. And so I think organizations have to just get very real about who's in their organization. And one of the things we talk about when we do unconscious bias is really showing the global demographic, right, of the workplace and how it's changing. And because of that, religion, sexual orientation, gender, race, all of it, age, we have to just be more inclusive and just open our minds. And to the extent that I could still do my job and I'm not harming anyone and I'm not, let it be.
Something, Kelly, and just a thought, I'm just thinking off the top of my head as well. But look over the last couple of years in the midst of this pandemic, when everyone had to go home and work from home, I could look anyway. For me, I could dress a lot more casually and a lot more personally than because I'm in my house now. So you can't tell me to go home, right? So now I know many of us got our pajamas on, got our slippers, and we looking nice at the top, down to our waist. But at the same time, look how much work people were still able to get done, and they were able to be more productive sooner and longer. And it just kind of relaxed a little bit more about the professionalism in the workplace. Not that people weren't being professional, but you weren't being so uptight about being in the office now. And because of the way your hair looks or whatever, people have been a lot more casual and a lot more accepting. And I'm just like, it took a pandemic to really kind of get us to that place, even to the place of working more flexibly and more remotely. We can see you can still be just as present, just as productive, and and be just as results driven in the office, with having a professional mindset and a professional attitude.
Yeah, it really is going to take people to get out of the mindset of what professional is, especially like when I started practicing law. 20 something years ago, I had to wear a suit and I had to wear stockings and,
I know. And it had to be navy blue or black.
well, see, now I didn't do that. I wore red and orange and pink and all of
Oh,
it.
well, girl,
I
you
never
were
did
way
that.
outside of the norms.
Yeah. And then, the stockings would keep tearing. And I was like, you know what? I'm not wearing these anymore. So I, started to take those off. And, then it got to be where we didn't have to show up in our suits every day at work. We could be more business casual. And so, the world evolves, and it's really evolved in the last couple of years with the pandemic. So companies have to shift. And with the Gen Z and the millennials, listen, they're not having it. They're not having it. And so we're just going to have to open our minds.
Yeah. All right. We got time for a couple more questions. We're going to finish up in about 10 minutes. What do we got next? Oh, okay. I see this one. Oh, Dr. Davis, can you please, what's the last part? Please explain. What's the last
deficiency? It says, please explain the deficiency of the HR used statement of the best fit.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. There it is. I see it now because I had a little thing up on my screen in the bottom that was blocking it. So explain the deficiency of HR using this statement, the best fit. Yeah, or culture fit. We do have to be sensitive to that because it may not be the most inclusive. Best fit a lot of times is relative and very subjective, and it oftentimes is reflective of the majority. And the majority in the organizations, particularly those at the top, look alike, think alike, come from the same background, same experiences. And so we try to replicate and recycle, and we try to bring in people who look like that. I know that from having ran recruiting for 10 years. And I know what my hiring managers used to tell me that they were looking for. And oftentimes it had really less to do with the qualifications of the job more than it was it fit what they were comfortable with. It looked like who they were. So they wanted us to go to the same colleges and universities that they went to, right? They wanted us to look for people who had certain qualifications and skills and experiences that they had, but it wasn't relevant to the job. So we have to go back and revisit that, and certainly make sure that when we talk about best fit, yes, I think we have to recruit to values. We have to recruit to the specific essential functions of the job, but let's be careful that some things that we say we need are not things that we need at all. There may be optional, they may be preferences, but they may not be qualifications. And we've let a lot of great talent be overlooked and undervalued because they didn't meet this threshold of best fit, which meant like me syndrome. So thanks for asking that. We got to move away from that and be intentionally inclusive about our language, about who we're attracting and why we're attracting it, and what does real results come from, right? So we got to be more open about that.
I always say that subjective good fit is the enemy of diversity and inclusion, right?
I know. Say it again. That's tweetable. Say it again.
Subjective good fit is the enemy of diversity and inclusion.
It is. It's the counter. I always say too, it's the cuss word to it, right? It's the absolute opposite of what we're trying to achieve when you're looking at, I understand most qualified, but that is also subjective as well too. When we're looking for the person who has, the experience, the knowledge, and yes, the skills and competencies. But again, making sure that those things are things that will help truly allow you to accomplish the job performance. If it's not, then it's pretty subjective.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about most qualified, going back to that, the most qualified of the people that you're looking at, that might be the most of the people you're looking at, but are you looking at all the people, right? So if your pool is a little bit, small, and you don't have all the people in there, then it might be the most qualified, right, of that little small spectrum. But if you have not expanded where you source people from, then are you really getting the most qualified person?
Absolutely. So cast your net wider, source from different locations, different places, different spaces. Don't say they're not out there, I can't find them. It just means that you're looking in very, very small and limited places, but they're there.
Yeah.
Next question. Oh, good. We got some good ones. So what are some creative ways to proactively source candidates? That's a perfect one. We were just kind of segueing into that. Sourcing candidates from underrepresented communities. Well, I can talk about my experience as a recruiter, and I manage diversity recruiting as well. So recognize that there are lots of colleges and universities that have a great student population of minority students. So that's one. The other thing is there's a lot of minority organizations for women, for people of color, for people of different races, religions, backgrounds, experiences, people with disabilities. And so making sure that you're partnering with them. I used to go to the conferences and go to job fairs that were with the National Association of even African Americans in HR, or the National Association of Black journalists, or you got, women in technology, you got women, we got the National Organization of Minority Architects. So for every major industry, there's probably a minority organization that was created because they didn't feel included, they didn't feel a sense of belonging or feel welcome, valued, or respected. So partner with some of those organizations and build relationships, because again, if you want to get top minority talent, you need to make sure you're building relationships, because again, they want to come work for organizations and work for leaders that they know, they care, and that they feel like will respect and give opportunities and have equitable level playing field. So those are very important. And certainly think about where you're placing some of your jobs on job boards. LinkedIn, obviously, we know is a huge one, but there are so many other minority job boards. And don't be remiss in leveraging search firms that have a really good track record of sourcing for diverse candidates as well. So those are just about 7 or 8 things that you could do. Kelly?
Also, just hopefully you have ask the diverse candidates or underrepresented people who work for you, your employees. Who do they know, right?
That's
they
right.
go to these networking events. They're parts of these organizations.
That's right.
They went to school with different people. Ask people who are in your community, who are in your churches, who are in, wherever you see people, whatever it is that you're trying to bring into your organization, go to those people and ask them. I always say, you can't get lemons from an apple tree. So don't go to the apple tree to find the lemons. Go
That's
to
right.
the lemon tree and ask the lemon tree, right? So go to the underrepresented people who are in your organization or who are in your community as a whole, and start asking, who do you know?
That's right.
It's interesting, Dr. Shirley, that this comes up, because when we're thinking about people who are in the majority, they do this.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
When they're on the golf courses, when they're at, the cocktail party, when they're on, wherever they are, they're seeding this information and like, hey, I have this thing, who do you know? Right. And that's how people end up being people's sponsors. And that's how all of a sudden somebody gets a job that you didn't even know was posted.
That's
It's
right.
the same thing, the same types of things that you leverage to get any other person in. Do the
That's
same
right.
thing.
That's right. Thank you. I love that. And again, as we think about this work, recognizing that there's so many nuances, you've got to make sure that you are flexible, adaptable, that you are being customized to your own industry, your own organization. There isn't like a magic wand or magic formula for this work, but recognizing that at the core of all of this is about being able to learn, being willing to flex, being open to new ideas, different perspectives, different ways of doing things. There's not a one size fits all, but this is all about how do we customize and specialize for the people that we're trying to attract, the ones that we're trying to serve, and the ones that will work in our organizations. And look, Lawrence, I saw your comment. Lawrence said, yeah, this is a good conversation, but the only person missing is Glenn and Keith. And I know both of them. So look, tell them they invited, they can come to the next LinkedIn Live show. I'm gonna have some other men on here. I had a couple of men on my last LinkedIn Live show, and they were phenomenal. So yes, thank you for being here. I don't know that we have time for any other questions, but look, here's what I want to leave you with. One is continue to follow us on LinkedIn. We'll be doing more of this. Y'all want to have Kelly back again? Put in the chat box. Yeah. We'll have Kelly back. I'm telling you, as you can see why I love her, our energy and just the way we kind of play off of each other in the various ways that we view things. And I really just respect her thought leadership and her expertise. But also, I just want you again to just know that this work that we're all engaged in is that it's very important and that everyone has a role to play, whether you're an ally, whether you're a champion, whether you are a change agent or the diversity officer or the HR generalist or the executive sponsor. Your role is important, and all of us has a responsibility to be a part of the change that we want to see, to be a part of the solution to the problems and the challenges that we're facing, to step up in today's current climate, as polarized and as divided as we are, to step up and to do your part. I so appreciate you being here today. I appreciate you following me. I appreciate the support. Look, I do want to tell you, please get the book. Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Dummies is all that. I'm telling you, I poured my 30 plus years in it, and I reached out to some of my other thought leader colleagues and friends in this space. And so it's not just the Dr. Shirley Davis show of all of the work that I put in it. I've used some of the thought leadership and the expertise and the wisdom from some of my colleagues that I've been with for nearly 20 and 30 years. So thank you all for being here. The book is on Amazon. It's also, again, something we're going to continue to use in I've got a DEI certificate of mastery that the book is actually the textbook. And Kelly is going to continue to help me do some of this training with our clients. We're still doing listening sessions. We're still doing audits. We're doing leadership assessments because this work is important, and we want to provide customized solutions to the problems and the challenges that you're facing today. Thanks again for being here, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in our next LinkedIn Live. Not sure what the topic is, but send me some things that you're interested in. But I'm going to pull some things out of the book, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Dummies. There you go. Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Dummies. There's so much in here. It's like 21 chapters. And so we'll be talking a lot about this because this work is necessary, it's important, and it is hot right now. All right, it's 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. Thanks again, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
There's a recording, so make sure you tell your colleagues to get the recording and visit my LinkedIn Live show.